several racist thoughts that I've been having. Let's start
This
with.
is not the time. Let's start with Kuzman and Gomez. How good are their nachos? Dear.
Yeah. Let's save
Dear.
that for the sister podcast, The Porch.
The Porch. Exactly right. Exactly right.
That's funny.
Hello and welcome to The Pouch, the podcast equivalent of not being born a cricketer that takes a not-so-serious look at the week in Australian news and politics. I'm Greg. Maybe I'll get my work logo on all my shirts just for those sweet tax benefits, Savage.
And I'm Jake. Budget this. Far Wharton. Oh, today's episode, we talk dress codes, budgets, quitters, and so very much more.
Jake, I'm excited. I hope the listeners are excited as well. I can't imagine that they're
tell
not.
how.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
I'm imagining all of the listeners excited at the moment. It's an interesting sight. In the spirit of reconciliation and recognition, yes, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're podcasting today, and we recognise their continuing connection to land, water, and community. We pay our respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm so out of whack, Jake. I've forgotten to hit the button which makes the music go. That's all right. We can just imagine it for now. It's brilliant. Now, Jake, I need to ask your permission.
Yep.
Before we get to the nitty gritty of today's show, I need to ask your permission about something. Is it okay that I'm wearing a puffer jacket?
Look, I appreciate you for asking. Look, you're a Queenslander, or at least you were previously.
Exactly.
And you know that around this time of year, things drop below 20 degrees Celsius, which is around the point where Queenslanders go from wearing shorts and short sleeve shirts to also puffer jackets, because 20 degrees Celsius is officially freezing.
I don't think I've ever seen a Queenslander in a puffer jacket. Do you own a puffer jacket?
I own a puffer jacket, but it's for the snow.
Yeah, exactly.
It's for the occasional times where I go to the snow.
And that's why I need to ask your permission, because, this is pretty much an official turning point from me, because being a Queenslander to a New South Welshman, shopping for the puffer jacket was an experience in and of itself. And I realised that it's not yet winter. Like we're still a few days away from winter.
Still autumn.
And so, this is quite unique. Being indoors and going, I'm going to wear my puffer jacket. We also have like hooks beside the door. So now we're that family who have jackets beside the door. So before we leave the house, I get to pick a jacket off the hook. It's the type of person I've always wanted to be.
That is a lot of fun. I must admit, I own a lot of jackets, Greg.
Really?
So I'd need a lot of hooks.
Right.
And I do have a a lot of hooks, but they're in my.
You don't put all your jackets at the front door, Jake. You put the ones that you just want to grab when you've got to chase the dog down the street or something.
There. Yeah.
All right. Speaking of chasing,
I've got the Monday jacket and then the Tuesday jacket. The Wednesday jacket has to be different to the Tuesday and the. So
right.
Look,
Okay.
There are things about this.
You treat jackets like I treat my jocks. Now, speaking of chasing the dog down the street. A lot to get through this week, Jake. If not a month's worth of material. And thank you to those listeners who have reached out and just asked where we've been. We've had our own little personal things going on, but nonetheless. Here we are.
I had to take time off to floss my teeth.
Yeah.
I have a lot of teeth. People who have seen the show, seen the live stream, know that I have a lot of teeth and they're very big. It takes a long time to floss. So I only do it once a year. Unfortunately, it took a month.
Yeah.
I do apologize to those people that were craving a show. But, look, I like to do a thorough job. Big teeth, lots of teeth. Took a bit of time.
Yeah, whereas I was just shopping for puffer jackets. It's a big commitment. And now, Jake, for those of you new to the show, we do a couple of warm-ups. Your warm-up is a bit less intense than mine, but that's okay. That's okay. I mean, it is meant to be a warm-up, right? I've sort of lost the vibe of it. Yours is, and I love it. I think I know why you chose this one. This is about the right to bear arms.
Yeah, it is. It's about the right to bear arms in Australia, and it's super
very serious
important
topic.
A very serious topic. Yeah, I'm actually Greg. I don't know if I've ever told you, but I'm a member of on Facebook a preppers community. They're serious preppers.
Yeah, the people who get ready for doom and gloom.
Yeah, exactly. And they're all talking about the right to bear arms. Now, what we're talking about on the Doomsday Preppers group, and what we're talking about here is a little bit different.
Right.
This is about the right for women to be able to show their arms, their actual arms,
Right.
in their workplace. The Department of Home Affairs has tried to ban bare arms on their 14,000 staff, proposing a new dress code that prohibits sleeveless tops, dresses, blouses, and anything, quote, too revealing, as well as jeans. Well, there's no casual Friday then. How are they going to do that? There's no floral Friday. Well, of course.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. That's the big story, isn't it? Now, Jake, you did mention that this targets women, but it actually targets everyone, doesn't it?
It certainly does, but I suppose those that are targeted more,
they're more likely,
strenuously than others is the women. But now it is, of course, really interesting timing, considering the recent issues with an inability for federal politicians to consider the agency of women, the ability of women to make their own choices.
They need a department of empathy at this point, don't they?
Oh yes, exactly. Yeah, Department of Online Empathy courses, please. So a community and public sector union national secretary, Melissa Donnelly, took up arms. They were bare at the time as well, arguing the wording of the dress code policy appeared to target women, who comprise of around 54% of the Home Affairs staff. And the Fair Work Commission knocked back the proposal on Wednesday, stating that the dress code rules would not be brought in without staff being consulted. Guys, how could you not consult the unions?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Like that was the interesting part when I read the article before, was about the fact that it's not actually, they're not saying it's not legal or that it's not appropriate or anything like that, just that they're not going to approve it because the staff weren't consulted.
Yeah, well, I think
it's a guise. It's a ruse.
That is where they would start. Bring it to the table, guys, so that we can shoot you down more formally. But it's the sort of thing that no self-respecting union would allow that sort of behaviour, that sort of allowing workplaces to decide what their workers are going to wear based on the puritanical thoughts of perhaps the leadership.
Well, I don't think I'm allowed to wear a tank top to work. Well, I know I'm not.
No, but it is, perfectly acceptable for a woman to wear a sleeveless dress, for example. It's perfectly acceptable on a Friday for me to come in jeans and a floral shirt. I love to do that.
Do you really have casual Friday at your job?
I call it Floral Friday because
you're the only one doing it.
Wear floral.
Yeah.
No, it's pretty well my whole office, but it is a very casual dress Friday. And, we're a high visibility area. We have plenty of very senior individuals in the Queensland public sector who drop by from time to time to say hello and wax lyrical about what we're doing. But we take that in our stride. A lot of departments. I've been in the private sector for I was in the private sector for a couple of decades, and we did pretty well the same. Every Friday, everyone goes casual. It's just the way that it is.
Fair enough. Well, we can't be banning that casual Friday, can we? My warm-up story, Jake, is a little bit more intense. I wanted to talk about the budget because I've been so excited about this. I've been so excited about this particular episode because of the budget. So here's some of the big reveals, right, from this year's budget, because we were all on the edge of our seats, hoping for the best here. The budget is $160 billion in deficit this year. $106 billion in deficit this year, with deficits forecast for the next decade. Now, I just want to clarify this with you, Jake, because you'll be better at this than I was, right? So let's say, for example, I'm doing the household budget, right?
Yep.
And I say, okay, we're going to earn, let's say, $100,000 this year, right? As a family. If I then forecast a budget, which is, say, $150,000, right? Does that mean that I'm $50,000 in deficit for my budget?
It does. It means you're $50,000 in deficit.
So where am I getting that $50,000 from?
Well, in this case, the analogy would be that you're borrowing it from the bank.
Right. Is that the Federal Reserve
in order
Bank?
to break that up? Yeah, essentially the Federal Reserve has gone out and purchased a bunch of debt and given it to the Australian taxpayers to pay back over time. Considering the current interest rate is, what is it, 0.7%?
Yeah. Now
It's pretty okay.
this is the interesting part, right? So,
Hmm.
this is the bit where I get to pretend like I half know what I'm talking about here. So now the deficit is going to continue. The forecasted deficit is going to continue for 10 years.
Yep.
And in 10 years, will actually be 1.5% of GDP. So there's no end in sight, and there's no plan of actual recovery for this budget. With my, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that that's because there's no tax cuts. There's no actual spending cuts announced in this, or not a lot of spending cuts announced in this budget, because they're going to wait until after the election to say, hey, guess what? This and this and this actually isn't getting any funding.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And just to be clear, yeah, right. No, absolutely. There are two things that are of note in this in this sphere, if you like.
Yeah, I do yeah.
Good, because I had no other analogies.
Yeah, that's okay.
Let's
roll with the sphere.
There's the debt, which is over 35% of GDP
at the moment, right?
Yep. And then there's the deficit, which is the amount to which we essentially are funding programs out of debt.
Right.
So it's the amount that we don't have in the budget to provide those programs.
Okay, because I've already put in some programs in place.
High.
They've already put in some programs in place, haven't they? So say
yeah,
right. So they would have said, this is already sort of accounted for. Okay, I'm probably a bit out of my depth here now. Okay, the assumption is that interest rates aren't going to move very much in the next 10 years, apparently, which is great for homeowners. I mean, I'm guessing, right? Because then you can control your budget, right? You can control how much income you're going to have and spend over the next 10 years, which is pretty wild. I would have thought with house prices that the reserve, that who does the interest rates,
the Reserve Bank,
right?
The Federal Reserve,
Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve, I would have presumed that they'd been upping the interest rates next week due to the crazy house prices. But anyway,
yeah. Look, I mean, they are more looking towards the fact that their price levers, i.e., their ability to essentially impact the speed of the economy is out. So what they want to be doing is they want growth in the economy.
Right.
So the last thing that they want to do is stymie growth. They're enabling as many people as possible, as many people as have liquidity, have money to buy, to go out and buy and buy crazily.
See, that's when you know you're getting old, isn't it? Is when you call the money that you have liquidity.
Oh, it's so liquid right now, Greg.
Okay, this is I feel like a different podcast, Jake, where we sit around and just chew the fat about economic growth. But interestingly enough, so that's just one of my interesting points. The other one is that the biggest spend is $17.7 billion on improving aged care, in particular funding thousands of extra home care packages. Well, that's good news, isn't it? Just Josh Frydenberg is all over the news saying this is the biggest spend on aged care since the dinosaurs.
Yeah, it's still well short of what the Aged Care Royal Commission suggested that we would need over the next significant period. In fact, they were citing around $1.3 trillion, which
really?
I think was about 2% of GDP.
Yeah.
So it's still enormously short of what that Royal Commission was suggesting we get or we have for
we allocate
aged care.
Yeah.
And a lot of this stuff is they've essentially set up they've locked in debt for the next several governments, essentially, whether they be Labor or Liberal. And so it's just quite interesting that what they didn't do is they didn't put any structural, positive structural changes. They didn't put in any, major structural programs. It was a very, you might say, very progressive budget. It had lots in there for social programs. It had lots in there for childcare. Not this year, but next year. It had lots in there for I suppose women, particularly women trying to escape from domestic violence.
$3.4 billion spent on women in the budget. More than half of that will go to childcare.
Yeah, I don't know whether you can directly tie. Well, I'm sure you can directly tie women to children, but I don't know whether you can say
No,
it's
that's a
for
good that's a
women.
good point. Yeah, it's a good point.
I
No,
don't know
no,
whether you
that's a
can
good
say
point.
it's for women, and
Yeah,
then yeah, it's a bunch of that is for the childcare program.
yeah,
Which yeah, so it's quite interesting. It was a pretty reasonable budget. I think what was interesting, of course, was the budget reply from Labor. They focused a lot on the federal government's inaction on climate change, the federal government's lack of credible vaccine rollout, at least at that stage, which was really I suppose last week. And you've got it in the script there
I
that
do.
they were all about transforming the economy to have a lasting legacy.
Yeah.
Whereas this government's budget is, it seems more about the transactional nature of how can we get ourselves out of COVID, and how can we be maybe a smidge better.
Yeah, and Anthony, one of the major pledges from Labor side has been the $10 billion in social housing fund in their budget reply. But from the research that I was doing, it was hard to find a few concrete things that Labor had actually replied on, especially given that the interviews with Jim Chalmers, the shadow treasurer, had been around, like you said, it's all about a vibe, man. It's all. Where's the vibe for this particular budget? It was interesting. Yeah. So he also mentioned real wages going backwards. One of the things I found interesting too was Josh Frydenberg spruiking the fact that this budget is all about promoting Labor values, which he attributed, Liberal values, Australian Liberal values, which is he spruiked as where did I put that here? As supporting the private sector, backing families, rewarding effort, encouraging personal responsibility. So a few little, I suppose digs at the other side there still, and just sort of, I suppose that's rhetoric in a way, but it's interesting that they feel like they have a bit of a monopoly on those sorts of values as well, and that's
Yeah,
what
I
he
suppose
sort of.
what they're trying to get away from there is that Liberal governments are traditionally about low spending, getting things back into balance. They're about having a positively balanced budget. They're about absolutely lower taxes, more support for private sector. But there was a lot more in there about growing the government, about growing services for the community. And a lot of that obviously is tied back to the recovery from coronavirus and, the severe chunks that it took out of many people's lives. It seems, the unemployment forecasts have been right on the money in terms of, employment is going up. But
Yeah,
with
so
it is
that's
going
interesting.
the,
Well, it's got up more
yeah,
than what it was before the Morrison government got in. So
yes,
unemployment 5.6%.
yes.
Which is lower than when the Morrison government got
Yeah, but I
voted in.
suppose one of the more interesting things about that is the sectors that are recovering and the rate that underemployment is going up. So more than half of those jobs that have been sort of recovered, it seems, are actually part-time jobs. So at
Right.
that part-time rate of around 20 hours a week, and a lot of that is because sectors are unable to get back up on their feet. Cafes are running at half the normal patronage, thus half their normal staff. Pubs are the same, clubs are the same. So a lot of the restaurant sector, a lot of the food and hospitality industry are much the same. So they're looking at much lower capacity and thus lower employment. So yeah, look, really interesting facts coming out in support of the budget that's come out. Plenty of things that weren't there as well, that people, I suppose, were expecting, but that's.
Well, I was certainly
there'll be
expecting a
more.
massive injection to the podcast industry, Jake. I'm surprised
I
that
know,
didn't make it in.
I know. Where was that? Where was that, guys? Well, there was a massive cut to the ABC as well. Another
Was there?
massive cut to the ABC. So,
Right, is that one of those cuts where the government just sort of say, look, it's not actually a cut, we just decreased the amount of funding? Yeah, is that what indexing is? Like they decreased the funding we still gave them more.
In real terms, you on paper, you were supposed to get 100 million and you got 50 million, but we didn't actually take money away. We just didn't give you extra.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay,
Still get a real increase. It's just not the same.
All right, so you spoke about how one of the digs at Liberal government was from Labor was about the fact that the vaccine rollout and how that's been bungled and all that sort of stuff. Where's all the money sort of being spent on that? Peter Dutton did hit back at Western Australian Premier, insisting that states had agreed to manage hotel quarantine. So this has to do with the stories around. When was this? This was.
It was about a week and a bit ago. When Perth went into another lockdown because of a case of COVID in the community.
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, so the Defence Minister Peter Dutton has slapped down the Western Australian Premier Mark McGowan after he called on the Commonwealth to step up and take responsibility for quarantining return travellers. Now, Jake, I will argue that the government has stepped up to do this in the budget for quarantining, and that they have allocated. I did put it in here somewhere, a certain amount to make sure that Howard Springs is up to 2,000 people. That's their commitment. Isn't that good?
No, it's not, because it's not enough people. It's just
$500 million. $500 million expanding Howard Springs to 2,000 people. That's enough.
Yeah, what they're calling it a technologically. What was it? A technologically enabled, purpose-built facility.
Yeah, that's great.
It's a couple of dongers. So it's
but they're single level. That's the whole point, isn't it? They're single level. There's no. You don't have the problems with.
Well, there's not supposed to be any cross contamination. Exactly. There's no ventilation between the units. You got enough space there, and it's out in the open. So you got opportunity to, not be cooped up in your room for 2 weeks.
I actually Googled, I used TripAdvisor to plan a trip in Howard Springs, and later on when we do another story about the India situation, I'll chat to you about what the top 3 things are to do in Howard Springs. So stay glued to your seats, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. All right. Talk to me about Peter Dutton. So this is
So
what is he? He's the Home Affairs Minister, is he? Defence Minister.
Well, no, he's the Defence Minister. Defence Minister. Just recently took on that portfolio. Yeah, okay. So the Premier Mark McGowan was, quite vociferous, as other premiers have been, and other chief ministers have been over the last several months, particularly over this, this quarantine situation, where essentially quarantine. It should be. I should be very clear. Quarantine, constitutionally, is in the hands of the federal government. The federal government has a large part to play in federal quarantine programs. Okay,
it's in the Constitution, isn't it?
It most certainly is. And so what occurred in the wake of the early days of COVID was essentially a negotiation with the state saying, hey, we want to bring home our people. Federal government, you need to sort out some quarantine stuff. And the federal government saying, we don't build buildings, okay? We don't hold shovels. We don't hold hoses, okay? We don't build quarantine facilities.
Yeah.
And to which everyone said, that whole Christmas Island thing, there's 30,000. There's space for 30,000 odd people, or whatever it is, like 10,000 people out there with a purpose-built medical facility, and the ability to fly in and fly out as required. It has enough space to bring in 747 jets, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And to which the federal government said, it's unfortunately that's entirely used at the moment. Because that group of Tamil refugees are there. Yeah, the 5 people are not 10,000 people.
Okay, but to be fair, a deal was struck between Prime Minister Scott Morrison and the state territory leaders on March 27th, and it says to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and save lives, National Cabinet agreed to create the hotel quarantine program on March 27th. States and territories are responsible for the management of hotel quarantine, given their primary responsibility in delivering healthcare.
Yes.
Done.
The issue
Case closed.
The issue is
another slam dunk for the Morrison government.
That March date has extended well beyond March. It's extended well beyond June. It extended well beyond December. We're into 1 and a bit years past that March date, where the states were going to take up that burden of quarantine, and we're well over a year into that, and it shows no symptoms of abating. Unfortunately, kind of like COVID itself.
Well, he wasn't I suppose he was never on the bus. Or do you remember the bus? Was it the bus? You don't have to.
Oh yeah, you got to get on the bus.
You don't have to be. You don't have to. Not everyone has to be on the bus for the bus to leave.
Yeah.
So we're guessing that Mark McGowan is the one he was talking about.
It must be, but the issue is that the bus is still going, right? The bus is coming home every week with more and more Australians who want to return home, and unfortunately, they have they have to be quarantined in a facility in a city of in most cases in a capital city of Australia, and that is an enormous imposition on the city's infrastructure. It is one of those things that, because of the nature of these things, sure, the federal government didn't want to take responsibility for it because they don't have health service delivery. They don't have hospitals. They don't have doctors. They don't have nurses. But they do have an army, and that army does have medics, and that army does have doctors, and that army does have nurses, etc. So,
they're very busy, Jake. You can't just drop
they
everything.
certainly are. They certainly are. But it's just underwhelming, I suppose, given that we had every single one of the state premiers and chief ministers, with the notable exception of New South Wales, calling for a purpose-built facility to house people federally. It's just one of those things that we would love to see a bit of leadership from the Prime Minister on this, and it doesn't seem that there is any.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that, especially given the budget, $500 million, 2,000 people, it's not a real great deal, especially with, this repatriation flight situation that everyone's talking about from India as well, which we will get to in a little bit. Woo! I told you we had a lot to get through, didn't I?
We did, and we still do.
Oh, gosh, we're still going. All right, outspoken. Now, this is interesting, right? I like this one. Okay, so George Christensen is going to quit politics.
Yeah, he's quit. He's quit. This is the gift that keeps on giving, this story.
All right, tell us a little bit of background of George Christensen. Who is he? Why did we care? Because we have to care, don't we? I mean, we have to care about these individuals sometimes, don't we? We do, because I mean they're voted in, they're MPs, they represent people. They're meant to be doing a whole bunch of stuff while I'm at work and doing my family and all that sort of stuff. Like, they're meant to be, looking after, making sure that my kids have a wonderful life, and they're meant to be looking after health, and they're meant to be looking after schools, and they're meant to be looking after all these things, right? So I shouldn't have to keep an eye on them, is my point.
Yeah. So,
but I do have to.
So he's a Nationals MP, and he is a career backbencher. So he's not a career portfolio taker. He's not a career doer.
That's so
he's
good.
A career sit backer.
So good.
But the best thing here is, right, he's done so little. He's done so little over his I think three terms. But he said he's leaving. He's leaving federal parliament at the next election, and he's warning of the quote broken state of politics and signalling that he won't go quietly. He's pretty quiet at the moment. So a couple of notables about him. So the Conservative Queensland MP who's been outspoken on social issues and spent up to 10 weeks a year in the Philippines and Thailand over a period of 10 years, while 4 years rather.
4 years,
4 years.
28 trips abroad, spending almost 300 days in the Philippines between 2014 and 2018.
Yeah, it was massive. He said that he only ever actually intended to serve 3 terms after first being elected at the 2010 election, and really only contested the last election to ensure that the coalition held the seat, but kept out a quote green tinged Labor government.
Yes,
I love it.
Yes.
He's in a pretty safe national seat. So
where is he? Do we know which one he is? Member for Dawson.
Dawson, that's right. Yep.
There you go.
There's actually a protest last week at that electorate. Actually, sorry, the protest was on Andrew Lemmings, the gentleman who just went out for online empathy training.
Right.
But anyway, sorry. So he's listed several road projects and the Adani Carmichael mine as his best contributions as an MP.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, who knew that he built a bunch of roads and a mine?
Well, he did. Obviously.
Yeah, he did it.
And the
He
people
did
who
it all
voted him in.
himself.
He's the Federalist standing in for the North. I'm on his website now. I was trying to find out what exactly he's done about George. George lives in North Queensland city of Mackay, where he was born, raised and educated. He's serving his 4th term as an Australian Member of Parliament for the Dawson electorate. He's an advocate for traditional Australian values and culture. He stands up for his region and fights for local jobs. Good on him.
Sure he does.
Yeah. Why not? He's
In
got a
20,
podcast. Oh, yeah.
He does, yeah. It's actually, I don't mind his podcast.
Conservative
I've listened
one.
to it a couple of times in the last few weeks.
Have you?
But yeah. I quite like conservative podcasters.
Oh, look, there's a conversation he has with Barnaby Joyce. Oh, we've got to get on that.
Yeah, it's
the
not
podcast
really entertaining,
defending
to be honest.
tradition and freedom. They're defending tradition and freedom. Host
yeah.
George Christensen MP talks to former Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce. Wow, about the pandemic, poverty rates. Gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, Barnaby Joyce is
What a party.
He's always been a huge fan of being of those traditional values, like the traditional marriage is something that he was very strongly in favour of, particularly while anyway.
Look, he's got some quotes on his website, Jake. The editorial said the maverick National MP George Christensen polls more votes among minors than most of Labor's leadership groups. He denies climate change, denounces Muslim immigration, and he was returned with an increased majority. A very cross and critical Malcolm Turnbull. Oh,
well, he's a national, he's an outspoken national.
Alan Jones said, this bloke is an outstanding local member who stands up for his constituents and talks sense.
Yeah, all
Alan
of that
Jones,
stuff.
Yeah. He's got a whole page of quotes. Get on it.
Couple of fun things about Christensen before I go to some really interesting things about his local branch and what they've done. So in July 2014, Christensen likened climate change to science fiction in a series of comments comparing contemporary statements about climate change to science fiction movie plot lines. February 2013, he was the only federal MP to attend a rally featuring the controversial Dutch politician and anti-Islamic campaigner Geert Wilders. During his tour of Australia, Christensen said that he supported Wilders' view that, quote, people of dual citizenship who act in a way that is contrary to the views of a country and engage in extremist violence should have their citizenships stripped and deported. Well, how about that? They have. So Christensen holds an ostensibly anti-abortion stance and has criticised all factions of Parliament, including his own party, for federal, local and international services which provide abortion services. February 2018, he posted a Facebook photo with himself holding a firearm, captioned, "Do you feel lucky, greenie punks?"
Oh, gosh, that's aggressive.
Was widely criticised.
In the Twitter sphere?
In the Twitter sphere, exactly. Later in the same year, he was investigated by the Australian Federal Police due to a discovery of large amounts of money being sent overseas by the MP. The Federal Police found no crime had been committed under Commonwealth law, but did raise concerns over which he had over whether he had compromised his position as an MP, and he was criticised for, as we said earlier, being in the Philippines for more days than he was in Parliament for 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I'm sure there's nothing dodgy going on at all.
Well, he met his wife there, so he's just recently married a Filipino woman. And that's what is ostensibly said that he wants to do when he wants to do when he leaves politics. He wants to be with his family.
Yes, of course. He's got photos of himself on Instagram with a mask that says "mask worn under protest."
I wonder if if somebody was taking a photo under protest as well.
There's masks saying "warning: you are being conditioned to view your freedom as selfish."
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely looks better in a mask because you're less able to hear him.
They're certainly words, aren't they?
They are words.
If you can say anything about them, they're certainly words, yes.
Hey, so one interesting thing is the local branch of Dawson in Queensland have asked the National Party to formally reject Christensen's resignation, to formally reject the resignation and to formally disallow him, so essentially disendorse him for the next election. And the
Right.
reason that they've said that is if you are disendorsed, you are entitled to around $150,000 in payout dollars, whereas he quit,
Right.
and he is
He
entitled,
shouldn't be entitled
to
to it.
zilch.
Yeah.
He's entitled to zilch, but essentially that local branch, and I can only assume that they were acting on his behalf, have tried to do this in order to take $150,000 of Australian taxpayers' money, essentially in order to fund this gentleman's endowment.
Well, I am just doing some back of the napkin maths here, Jake, and that is a lot of money.
I think it actually does qualify as a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah, technically, yeah, it's a metric lot.
It is a reasonable amount. Yes.
Now, speaking of blame games, Jake, we haven't heard or seen anything from Daniel Andrews for months. He's just decided that he's had enough. That he's off the. He couldn't handle the pressure, could he? It was basically the straw that broke the camel's back, wasn't it?
Quite literally, almost. I think.
But we haven't heard from him for months, right? He's disappeared, right? Not to be seen in the spotlight. But before he did go, Jake, he did strike a few deals with China, which in a deal known as the Belt and Roads situation. I don't know. You need to interrupt me because I don't know what I'm talking about. But this is all about the fact that the federal government can now intervene into states' decisions to deal with China.
Yeah, so the essentially there was this deal that Melbourne, or rather, sorry, Victoria had signed essentially in principle, and that was essentially the premise of it was China has a bunch of cash that they're splashing around the world. So this isn't just targeted at Australia, but they're doing it around the world in order to strengthen partnerships with countries all around the world, doing cool infrastructure things that China will fund, and essentially the host country will have to co-contribute, and thus it could be said that the host country and China are doing great things together, right?
Yes.
So on the face of it, great initiative.
Sounds good.
And
yeah,
exactly. And
no
Victoria
problems.
looked into it.
No problems.
Well, on the face of it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. You got to take things at face value.
Nothing necessarily bad.
Yeah,
about
nothing
it,
to see here. Yeah,
exactly. And it should be noted that the Belt and Road Initiative, signatures that happened. They were well before this escalation in tensions between Australia and China.
Yeah.
So they were during.
Who would have thunk it?
Exactly. It was just an in principle signature. They weren't saying we're going to do this together, we're going to spend this much money together on these projects, etc. None of those discussions had been made, or at least that was not in the in principle agreement. What had been agreed was that they would consider working together on this Belt and Road Initiative. Anyway, the Australian government decided, well, no, sorry, it's not in the strategic interests of Australia to be doing anything in the Belt and Road Initiative. At the same time, they were rejecting Huawei, who had put in a major bid to be part of Australia's 5G rollout. They had strongly condemned the port of Darwin, which has been leased to a Chinese multinational for something like 110 years, in perpetuity, and a number of other things as well. We were obviously outspoken towards the beginning of coronavirus around China's inability to contain it, or contain the spread, rather. Not that necessarily it's possible to do so. In a
separate story, isn't it? I mean, it's so full on.
Separate story, exactly. And tensions escalated. Australia brought in this rule that allows them to intervene, and essentially Australia federally has now said that they would like to formally tear up that agreement, right?
Yes, good.
And China has threatened retaliation over this decision to cancel Victoria's Belt and Road Agreement as the move secured support.
As if to prove their point.
Exactly. Exactly.
So bizarre.
Exactly.
So bizarre. Yeah, right.
Go
No, I was just gonna mention how reliant Australia actually is on China. Apparently, they buy a significant amount of our iron ore each and every year. In 2019, they bought $63.1 billion of our iron ore. That was up from $50.1 billion of iron ore. They also buy natural gas, coal, gold, wool, beef, alcohol beverages, barley, and crustaceans. So the things that have been impacted by some of these trade tensions are sort of down the bottom of that particular list, but it's still a significant amount. Barley was 915 million in 2019, which was down from 1.5 billion in 2018. So, we are pretty reliant on that one. But so that's a huge. We are risking a massive chunk of our sort of income in this regard as well. But it's got to be done.
They are our largest customer by a tremendous margin.
By a bajillion, yes.
By a bajillion. In
by a metric lot.
Biometric fair amount, yes. In addition to that, there's paper, there's timber, there's seafood. There's just it's
crustaceans,
just
Jake.
Crustaceans, exactly.
They accounted for $801.3 million in 2019.
It was enormous, yeah. Essentially, China has said, "Hey,
300 million more than in 2018, mind you." Spent 555. That's a lot of crustaceans.
It's the
They have their own oceans. Aren't they annexing their own oceans to get this stuff? Anyway.
Yeah, get out. Exactly. They're extending their reach. But yeah, look. Essentially, what they're saying is what China is saying is, hey, you know how we escalated tensions when you started doing rude things to us, when you started disrespecting us. We really didn't like that, and we're probably going to not like when you escalate tensions further by tearing up this agreement that was just in principle.
Yeah.
Because you're essentially saying, hey, you know how, Victoria, when you agreed to talk with China, you agreed on paper, you signed a piece of paper to say that you would like to have discussions on potential business interests into the future with China. By tearing that up, you are starting a feud, or moreover, you're escalating an already existing feud.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's big news, Jake. I mean, this whole China situation is big news. Just as one little I guess caveat. I love what you said about the fact that that they're our biggest sort of exporter. Iron ore, number one, down to Brazil. We export $40.0 billion of iron ore compared to $10 billion to Brazil. Barley is $1 billion compared to barley is $40 billion compared to $10 billion there. Maybe I've got something wrong there. Iron ore, nope, 40 and 10. Barley is what? Yeah, I don't know. That graph keeps changing. Beef was $117 million. Now, my point here, Jake, crustaceans. We do have some competition with exporting crustaceans to China. Canada, $641 million. And then Ecuador. Those Ecuadorians are exporting more crustaceans to China than Australia. Can you believe that?
I mean, does that tell you
if something doesn't get you riled up today? If that doesn't get you riled up today, there's something wrong.
It's the Ecuadorians, right?
It is the Ecuadorians. And
the
Argentinians.
Yeah, nobody likes Canadians anyway.
Well, no one likes Ecuadorian crustaceans, surely.
Exactly.
I mean, what are your top 3 Ecuadorian crustaceans?
The Bolivian spider crab.
It's a good one. It's a good one. You got to slow cook that bad boy for a week. Yeah.
You do. The Ecuadorian horseshoe crab.
Is that the one they keep throwing back in the ocean and it keeps looking like a face? Is that one?
No, that's a Japanese one. Yeah, that's the one that ended up looking like the kabuki masks.
Yes, that's right.
That was incredible.
Yeah.
Were you at the same Richard Dawkins talk that I was?
I think I'm probably 10 years ago. I was watching the same ones on repeat on YouTube. Yeah,
exactly.
Anyway.
I think my final favorite Ecuadorian crustacean is the Buenos Aires shoulder spine
seahorse
crab. I lost myself.
Is the seahorse a crustacean?
It's a seahorse. No, I don't think it is.
Okay. What does it got? It's got to have
mammal.
Is it? It's an asexual mammal. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, very, very interesting. Now, Jake, at the beginning of the show, I made a joke about not being born a cricketer.
Congrats, by the way.
Thank you. Slightly tongue-in-cheek. Because if I was born a cricketer and I did go overseas and I did go to India, being kicked out of India for the pandemic is one thing. After the whatever the tournament or whatever got cancelled, they went to the Maldives. Dreadful. Went to the Maldives, and
sounds awful.
And I've only just gotten home, like literally today. They just gotten home today. And I've lost the story. Here we go. The Australian cricketers and staff have touched down in Sydney after leaving coronavirus-stricken India. Australian cricketers are back on home soil after leaving India and touching down in Sydney from the Maldives this morning. The 38 players and officials went to the Maldives a fortnight ago following the suspension of the Indian Premier League. Cricket Australia has stressed it made no requests for special exemptions to quarantine, and Prime Minister Scott Morrison has said they'll be treated like ordinary Australians. Thank goodness. I'm glad they clarified that.
Take your ball and get out.
After landing, the group was met by police and loaded onto buses to be driven by police escort to quarantine hotels across Sydney, where they will spend 2 weeks in strict quarantine. So they do have to quarantine. Their anticipated return amid strict international arrival caps has spurred significant debate, with more than 8,000 Australians still stranded in India. So this is 8,000. This is by Carly Waters from the 9 News. That's where I'm reading this from. So this is fascinating because they were able to get back. Some people... Yeah, so former Test player Michael Hussey will not be among the group arriving in Sydney. He will be flying back on a separate flight after testing positive to COVID-19. Now, Jake, can you see where I'm going with this?
Yes.
Where?
We need a federal program of quarantine.
Exactly. And we have that in the hub. Okay, well, where I'm going, Jake, is the fact that there's still 5,000 people left there. When they first started the repatriation flights the other day, how many people made it back?
It was several.
It was two, Jake. No, it was less. It was more than two. But apparently the plane was half full because either people tested positive for coronavirus or they were considered close contacts of people who had coronavirus in India. Yet he just gets to waltz back through. I don't know. Maybe he wasn't coming back from India.
The reason that the Prime Minister, I think only a week ago, the reason the Prime Minister announced in a press release, which he later walked back and denied any recollection of having had it in the press release, of essentially there being enormous fines and a potential jail sentence for anyone caught coming in from India illegally.
Exactly.
The reason that was instituted was because of a bunch of Australian cricketers who had gone over to India to either play in, watch, or contribute to the Indian Premier League, the IPL, and found essentially what they were referring to as a loophole.
A loophole, yes.
A loophole, yes, in order to get into Australia, which was essentially going into a country that performed testing, getting your test done in that country, and thus you were able to show, hey, I have a thing from Dubai that says that I don't have, I'm not showing this ticket from India that says that I don't have this. I'm showing it from Dubai. So essentially, they were able to get this loophole and come into Australia, without having to wait the almost mandatory, significant periods of time that most people who are Australian and overseas and trying to get back into Australia have to wait.
Yeah, I was speaking to my wife about it this afternoon, and I said, look, are we really that surprised that in Australia, you've got athletes getting the, international athletes getting the vaccines prior to sort of some of Australia's most vulnerable people. Right.
Yeah.
So there were whole sections of disability services that were saying that they hadn't been given any access to the vaccine at all. Yet the Australian Olympic teams were getting access to it early. And I was sort of like, are we really that surprised that we're treating sports people differently in Australia? I mean, we have a huge history of it. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. What surprises me is people's reaction to it when we do it. It's like, look at the stuff that people like Nick Kyrgios and stuff get away with and still get massive sponsorship deals and still get their, faces and stuff plastered all over the shopping centres as if they're some sort of, good person who my kids need to look up to, it's just dreadful. Anyway, I'm not saying that all sports people are like that, but, we do treat our sports people differently.
We do.
In Australia.
We do.
We hold them in very high regard.
We do, while I acknowledge that, it probably shouldn't be so, and and it's one of those things that I think Australians are right to balk at the inequity that essentially enables, the inequity in a system that enables people who kick a ball good or throw a discus far.
Yeah.
To be able to access the vaccine faster, that will get back into a country faster than, say, a vulnerable person.
Well, you're spot on. There's a caveat to this particular story here, and it says the New South Wales government conceded it did lift its strict cap of 3,000 return travellers to cater for the cricket players. Like, see, that doesn't surprise me. What surprises me is when people go, "Oh, we shouldn't be doing that for cricket players." It's like, well, we are going to do that for cricket players because that's what we do.
Yeah. Because they bring in cash, they bring in viewership, they bring in, they bring in an ability to not think about the crippling bills for 2 hours while we watch them do their thing.
Yep. We're asked to consider the request. Lifted it up.
Exactly. They hold a special place in our society. So it is one of those things. We make concessions for them. And then we get upset when we make concessions for them.
That's right. I'm upset, Jake, Yeah.
It's the double standard of being Australian.
And on that note, on that, Jake, we're gonna leave it there. I think. Are you happy to leave that there? You feel like you've got it out of your system?
Yeah. I've got it off my chest.
Did you?
Yeah, I feel like it.
Well, Jake, I've got to say, I know that you've been very, very busy. I've been very, very busy. So thank you so much for putting together this show with me today. And, we're still committed to this weekly situation. We just couldn't be at the moment, which is, it's fair enough. When you're doing a little free podcast, it's how it goes. But thank you so much for our patrons for sticking around, and for helping us out there. Jake, when people have finished chasing their own dogs up the street, what would you like them to do?
Love it if they could go to patreon.com/thepouch, and consider subscribing, consider being a paid patron of the show. You get such great, cool stuff with it. Not only do you get a regular podcast that isn't always so regular, but mostly is, but you also get cool stuff like Greg's hair and face. Like he just sends them to you. Randomly.
Just snippets.
Here is
because we have your address now.
Yeah. Exactly. Look, if you're not ready for that level of intimacy, we'd love it if you could go to your podcast listening application of choice and rate us favorably, because it helps people to find us and it makes us feel all warm and fuzzy on the inside, also the outside.
Yeah, well, I've got the puffer jacket on, Jack. I feel warm and fuzzy on my chest at least. Anyway, it's good. Yeah. Can't see what's happening down there, but that's all right. That's not the important part of the camera. And if you want to share the love, you can do so by telling your friends, families, and foes to head to thepouchthepodcast.com, where they can choose their favorite podcast player of choice and subscribe that way. We do have an episode coming up with the boys from Politics Over Coffee.
Yes,
or the boys formerly the boys from the podcast formerly known as the as Politics Over Coffee.
Very confusing very quickly.
Yeah, that's all right. That's a sign of things to come. Stick around for that one.
Absolutely.
I think what it was, May 30th? Something?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, so stick that around.
Yeah,
stick that right
around.
in your around.
Yeah. Do it. Fast.
All right, I'm going to go and watch some sports. I'm going to chair swirling. Is that a sport? Can't
it is.
My headphones.
It is a sport.
Is it?
How long can you swirl without going dizzy and falling off the chair?
Yeah, and drinking a beer.
Yeah.
Theoretically, as long as you put a beer in there, you could probably turn anything into an Australia sport.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Weekend sport.
Yeah. Well, that's right. Sitting on the couch, have a beer. It's a sport. Chase the dog up the street with a beer. Sport.
Yeah. Sport. Exactly. Well, that's technically sprinting.
Yeah. Any sort of anyway. Gareth Strystomana said correct. About the date, I presume. I better put it in some sort of diary or something. That was all up here, Gareth. It's all up here. I think I should get another correct for being able to say your last name correctly. Strystomana.
Yeah, exactly. Correct.
Yeah, correct. Double correct.
Hey.
I'll say your name and drink a beer. It's a new sport.
Yeah. While sprinting up the road.
Now it's a medley.
I love it.